actually take the quiz. I'm busy. Very Philip Dupree. Michael, there he is. What would you say to a person of color in the room who is deeply concerned you may not be willing to both acknowledge and address the additional challenges that people of color, particularly black people, face in America?
So the only way to answer that question is to show rather than tell. I mean, I can say in this room that I care about these things. But I think the better thing I can do is go out on the trail and model the kind of campaign that cares about these things. And again, precisely because I don't come from a community excluded in that way, it is, I think, doubly important for me to demonstrate the seriousness with which I take it. As I mentioned, part of that is around the specific agenda that looks at reversing the patterns of racial injustice that are shot through our criminal justice system, that looks at how healthcare has basically reached the point where we could classify racism as a health crisis because you can quantify the effects on it. For example, as we've seen recently in the research, the fact that black women will die at 3 times the rate of white women in childbirth, to take one example. And some of the other things we talked about with education, housing, and so forth. Some of it's by making sure I've had a chance to explain what we did about this in South Bend. We are a community that's about 40 to 45% non-white, about 25% African American. And these matters of structural racism affect life in our community. There are neighborhoods where it's as if the economic recovery never even happened. And sure enough, most of them are black and brown neighborhoods. It's why we've made sure we set up a home repair program to try to keep people in their neighborhoods. It's why I've seen to it that there's an African American majority on the board that makes decisions about police disciplines in our city. It's why we've worked to make sure we're investing more in the underinvested areas in our city. And so I want to make sure that that record is understood. But the other thing, and maybe the biggest thing in a way, to show rather than tell, is how we build this campaign. And so it's urging leaders, activists, voters of color to be part of this process, to help shape it. I mean, we've made very clear the values that I think we all share, but there's a lot that can be shaped in terms of priorities and vocabulary and conduct and tone. And we have been building a team whose diversity makes me proud. But I know that that's just the beginning, because I remember a moment when we had activists in my office early in my tenure, in my conference room, and one of them said, we don't feel like we have a seat at the table. And he said this while literally sitting at my table, like my physical table was there, right? And early on, I just thought, hey, what are you doing? Like, you're literally at my table, you don't get it. And I thought, well, if you're in my office at my table and you don't feel like you have a seat at the table, what does that say about us? Does that mean that we may have sent out an invitation, but it doesn't mean you feel welcome? And so making sure that not just our personnel, but our practices reflect that goodwill, I think is particularly important for communities that have seen Democratic and Republican politicians let them down. And for whom, even if you can establish and prove a level of goodwill, that won't be quite enough because people are looking for results. But I will invite you and anybody else who's focused on this and cares about this to feedback to us how we can make sure we're getting this right. So thanks very much for raising it today.